So my name is Varun Deshpande. I'm the managing director at an organization called the Good Food Institute India. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit further about what our esteemed speaker said just before me, which is a very exciting sector called alternative proteins. It's something that's emerging all over the world, and it has tremendous implications for businesses that operate in the pulse sector. So the Good Food Institute is a global nonprofit. We have offices everywhere in India, the United States, Israel, Brazil, Greater China, Europe. And we're driven by this pressing question that affects each and every one of us in this room and beyond this room. And that question is, how are we going to feed nearly 10 billion people by 2050, which Mr. Hussain also brought up, through systems that don't negatively impact food security, scarce natural resources, biodiversity, climate change, public health, all of these really, really important things. I think we can all agree also that this question is particularly important in India and in countries like India, because we have a really, really big challenge when it comes to feeding our population, nourishing our population sustainably over the next decades. Some of the major problems that persist for us in our country are some of the highest cohort rates of malnutrition anywhere in the world. So if you look at anything across the spectrum of iron deficiency anemia, folic acid deficiencies leading to all sorts of problems like neural tube defects, these are real debilitating problems that affect the health and security of our nation and countries like ours. Now, unfortunately, when we're trying to feed these 10 billion people, what we have isn't a system that's very sustainable in doing so. So going back to this map, if you look at the world, something like 30% of the world is land, or is habitable land. About 50% of that land is already used for agriculture, and the rest of it is our dwindling forests and shrublands, right? So we're seeing all over the world, we're seeing the Amazon is burning currently, we're seeing forests in Indonesia burning for different reasons. 70% of that agricultural land is already used for livestock. So whether it comes to growing crops to feed livestock, or whether it comes for pasture, we're using a lot of land that's available to us on this planet in order to feed livestock. But all of that land that we're using, all of those inputs, they only give us about 30% currently of global protein supply. So why do we have this imbalance? We have this misnomer, this misconception that we're getting all of this protein from animal-sourced foods, but actually, even though we're using all these resources, we're only getting 30% of global protein. So why is this happening? What is the underlying root cause of all of this discrepancy and all of this resource burden? And it's very simple. We actually eat animals that eat plants. It's as simple as that. So we're growing all these crops, we're feeding them to biological systems, we're feeding them to animals. So if you and I went home today and we watched a movie on the couch, and that's all we did all day, we would be burning calories, because that's what living things do, right? So a chicken, which is the most efficient farmed animal, takes in 9 calories of input for every 1 calorie of output in the form of flesh. The rest of it is spent breathing, moving around, growing feathers, growing beaks, all of the things that we don't necessarily consume or need, right? And this has been optimized over decades. So the chicken has been optimized in concentrated feeding operations like the United States over a very long time. So we're bumping up against really hard biological limits here. We can't really get much more efficient than this. So if you look at something that's discussed a lot, where we talk about food waste. Now we know this is a stat that gets thrown out a lot. Roughly 30 to 40% of food is wasted globally. In countries like the United States, that's usually food waste, so food that's coming on a plate and wasted. In countries like India, it's a bigger proportion of it that's contributed by post-harvest losses and all the things that are issues in the supply chain. But if you count what I'm saying as waste, if we say that if we're giving 9 calories into a chicken to get 1 calorie out in the form of flesh, then the difference here, this 800% difference, should be counted as waste. And that dwarfs all food that's currently wasted in the world. And the chicken, as I said, is one of the most efficient farmed animals. So fish, depending on what the fish is and how you count it, is about the same. Pigs are worse, cows are way worse. And this is the general rule when we're eating biomass, right? So when you go higher up on the food chain, when you're in an intensive farming system, you have to give a lot of inputs to get minimal outputs. And we're bumping up against this scarcity more and more as time goes by when we have this equation when we have to feed these 10 billion people over the next decades. And it's not just the efficiency argument. All of those steps involved in growing all those crops, raising the chickens, transporting the chickens, slaughtering the chickens, it's incredibly hard on the planet. So chickens release 40 times more carbon dioxide per calorie of protein than lentils. This is why United Nations scientists have said that animal agriculture is one of the most significant contributors to the most pressing environmental problems in the world. Any of those things. So whether we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, where animal agriculture emits or causes more climate change than all greenhouse gas emissions from the entire transportation sector combined. So all planes, trains, automobiles on Earth. Or if we're talking about problems like ocean acidification, where we're overfishing, and it's leading to ocean dead zones all over the planet. And of course, there's the increasing awareness now of public health considerations arising from animal source foods, right? So as we speak right now, aside from the NCOV outbreak in China, there is also a pandemic in the Chinese population that has existed for over a year. It's called African swine fever. It's killed roughly 1/3 of the entire pig population in that country. And China houses about 1/4 of the world's pigs. The reason for this is because we use a lot of antibiotics to raise animals. So we have to raise animals, feed those animals, and keep them healthy. And this is an underlying economic pressure on producers of livestock. This is not something that we're talking about that we need to police or that we need to help those people internalize these costs. This is an economic pressure that we need to be considerate about with producers. So if you look at any of these issues across the spectrum, whether it's environmental degradation, food security, public health, or even animal welfare, these are all problems that consumers have become increasingly aware of over the last decades. But despite all of this, global meat demand is on the rise. So this year, people are eating more meat than ever before. And the reason for this is simple. People want to eat meat. It's tasty, it provides protein, it's a prestige food. So Mr. Hussain was talking about a lot of data coming from the US. This is also data from the US, where if you survey people about why they eat meat, protein matters and taste matters. Meat is nutrient-rich and it's tasty. In countries like India, you also have the issue of, not the issue, but the consideration of prestige. So if you go into an urban slum in Mumbai and you ask a family of 4 what they're eating, they'll tell you that they eat 1 mutton meal a week, which costs them 460 rupees. And if they could, they would spend 920 rupees a week on 2 mutton meals a week. It brings people together, it's aspirational, it brings them prestige. And protein demand is rising all over in India as well. So it's not just a global phenomenon that protein is demanded. In India, this is a huge industry trend that's being seen in a secular way across sectors. As a result, what we're seeing is that over the next decades, that meat consumption growth is being driven by markets like India, the very same markets that have the food security problems that we're trying to address. So the solution to this is not, as I said, to lobby, to ban meat, or to cause meat producers to internalize costs, or to do all sorts of things that have been tried in different experiments all over the world, but with varying success. What we're seeing all over the world right now that's incredibly exciting and shows huge promise to help us transition from this is the creation of entirely new categories of food enabled by underlying technologies. And this is all stemming from the consumer and the producer, as I said. So consumers are not going to change what they're eating unless you give them something that satisfies the demand side factors that matter to them, which is overwhelmingly taste, price, convenience, sometimes health, sometimes food safety. But taste, price, and convenience overwhelmingly across the world. If you make products that cost the same or less and taste the same or better than what consumers want to eat, they have an option to switch, which feels like a simple switch. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice. And we've seen this with technology enabling these switches for underlying latent demand all over the world. So there used to be conferences in New York City, urban planning conferences, where the only topic of discussion, for example, was how to clear the horse manure off the streets of New York City. The only topic of discussion. And then at the end of those conferences, people got in their horse buggies and went home. And then a man named Henry Ford came along and changed all of that. And nobody could have predicted how quickly that would happen. But the point here is that it was satisfying a latent demand. People wanted to do something. They wanted to move. And Henry Ford didn't give them a faster horse buggy. He gave them a completely different product that satisfied the same demand. So these are the technologies that are satisfying this demand across different categories. We're going to focus mainly on plant-based proteins, which is the category to the left there. And when we say alternative proteins, we mainly mean finished products that are driving a lot of consumer demand, end products that are things that people already want to eat. And the hero category here is something called plant-based meats. And plant-based meats are a new category of food, which basically means something that's made from a crop or a plant ingredient or even a fungal ingredient, but it has the same texture, the same sensory experience as meat. So as I said, it feels like a simple switch, not a sacrifice. And Mr. Hussain had mentioned the Beyond Burger, right? This is a company that's done extremely well over the last year. It was founded less than, or exactly 10 years ago, about 10 years ago. It's made from yellow pea protein. So my Argentinian friend there, who's selling yellow pea protein, this company is driving demand for yellow pea protein all over the world. Because it's made from plants, and it's much less intensive, it uses orders of magnitude less land, water, emits orders of magnitude less greenhouse gases. So Americans eat 3 burgers a week, which is a lot. If you switched one of those burgers a week to a Beyond Burger, it would be the equivalent of taking 12.2 million cars off the road, or powering 2.3 million additional homes. And as I said, it's powering also the demand for the ingredient, the yellow pea protein. So in 2019, yellow peas for pea protein were grown in 7 states in the United States, over 1.1 million acres, which was up 28% from the year prior. This company also went public on the stock exchange last year, so you can take a look at their stock price. It's been doing incredibly well. And of course, as I said, there's a lot of interest in this area. It's really moving along very quickly. We're seeing a lot of companies get involved in that specific hero category, which is burgers, because Americans are eating a lot of burgers. But we're already seeing different heroes emerge as well. And what's really interesting is it's pulling in the biggest food companies in the world, which, as I say, is driving even more demand for those ingredients. So whether it's Nestle, whether it's Tyson Foods, as Mr. Hussain said, Maple Leaf in Canada, Cargill, all of these companies are making investments in plant-based companies, which is leading to this global picture. Coming to a second product that's really interesting that's also made from pulses. A company called Just in San Francisco makes this product. It's called the Just Egg, but it's made from mung beans. So the challenge here was in creating something that performs exactly like eggs and tastes like eggs for the consumer and for people who serve eggs. And once again, because it's made from lentils, it uses far less water, far less land, emits far less CO2. And just as companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat have been gaining a lot of traction for their plant-based meats work, the Just Egg is going to scale up a lot over the next years as well. In fact, if their projections are half true, they will be the largest private buyer of mung beans anywhere in the world within the next 3 years. So really quickly running through some of the science behind all of this, because it sounds like magic. You're working with plant proteins, as Mr. Hussain said, and you're trying to make them perform like animal tissue. And animal tissue is highly fibrous, it's highly textured, and you need to do a lot of work. There's a lot of science involved here, because these are new categories of foods. So all across this spectrum, and I'm going to very quickly dwell on each of these, from sourcing the protein to figuring out what the protein looks like, isolating it, figuring out the formulation, having the formulation and processing in place, the infrastructure in place to bring something to market, there's opportunities to get involved all across this spectrum. But it is a highly technical area, as I mentioned. So these are all things that we map out. We'd be glad to talk to you about this later. But really quickly, so at this point, crops have been optimized for all kinds of different products. We know this. So wheat, for example, has been optimized over decades for bread. If you and I wanted to make a bread, we could go and find a supplier for any kind of bread that we wanted to make. We could go and probably find hundreds of suppliers for any kinds of bread that we wanted to make. They would perform exactly how we wanted to. We would have access, or we wouldn't need access even, to the scientific information about them. But this isn't true necessarily about pulses or about other indigenous crops. So this is an area that makes a lot of sense to look at when it comes to optimizing products for these end uses, because it's a huge and growing area. When you're looking to source all of these ingredients as well, there are opportunities across this. So in terms of isolating protein, in terms of new technologies in doing so and doing it more efficiently, once you have the crop that's optimized, so maybe you've optimized a pea protein to have 22%, yellow pea rather, to have 22% protein, which means you have less of a starch fraction, which means your price and your economics at scale become much easier. You might also be able to optimize in sourcing that, in isolating that protein. And then, of course, when it comes to the infrastructure for processing, there's opportunities here as well. And I really skimmed over that to get to this one final point on the scientific portion, which is that at this point in history, a lot of technologies allow us to do things that have never been done before, because data is available at scales that were never available before. So when it comes to analyzing the genotype, the functionality of all these crops, and how they perform in different formulations, we have tools and suites of technologies now in computing, in manufacturing, everywhere that would allow you to do those things. From a business standpoint, this is a huge opportunity. Because if you look at the suppliers in the plant protein landscape, the one on the left there is soy. And everything else is dwarfed by comparison. So even yellow pea protein, which as I said is doing a lot in the market right now with Beyond Meat and other companies, there aren't that many suppliers of it, let alone other types of lentils, other types of pulses, and legumes. So really quickly, if you were able to cultivate yellow peas, if you were able to optimize the crop as a case study to have more protein, as I said, and if you were able to optimize the manufacturing, isolation techniques, et cetera, there would be a lot of opportunity to sell through to those partners in a rapidly maturing industry. Really quickly, I also wanted to underline that a lot of this data is international. We're actively doing research in the Indian market to figure out the size of this opportunity globally for Indian producers, Indian researchers, Indian ingredients providers. We'd be happy to partner with you to release some of this data, which we believe would be mutually beneficial to everyone in this room. Another area that's really interesting, which I'm only going to talk about for about 2 minutes, is called cultivated meat. So moving away from plant-based meats for a second. Cultivated meat is basically a biotechnology product where you take cells from an animal and you grow them by skipping the animal entirely. So it's kind of like farming cells without needing to farm the entire animal. And this has been done in a suite of different industries before. What you get at the end is 100% biologically meat. So for example, if you were allergic to chicken, you would not be able to eat cultivated chicken that's cultivated from cells. And this is kind of what it looks like at scale. So you take the cells of the animal that you need to provide, which could be chicken, it could be fish, et cetera, and you'd grow cells inside a clean, safe reactor, which is basically what happens inside the body of a chicken. But here you can actually monitor exactly what's happening. And then the final product that you get would be differentiated chicken. This industry has had a very rapid path to market, and it's racing towards market right now. It's not commercially available. In 2013, Professor Mark Post on the left there, who's a Dutch researcher, he grew and ate a lamb burger rather, live on TV. And this research project cost $330,000. Now he has his own company where they're racing to market at a cost basis of about $10 to $12. And when this comes to market at scale, the process of growing it is going to look very similar to something we all know, which is beer, or even industrial yogurt fermentation. The first cultivated meat company in the world was set up by an Indian in the United States, a man named Dr. Uma Valetti. It's called Memphis Meats, and they just made huge news this past month for raising a round of $161 million from SoftBank and Temasek and Norwest Partners. And this is Memphis Meats' first product, their first tasting that they did. It's a cultivated meatball, which they had a tasting of in 2016. This is another company called Shiok Meats, which is an Indo-Singaporean company, which makes cultivated shrimp, and they're also racing to market and driving down the cost rapidly. And the reason I bring all of this up is because we have to think of all of these foods of the future, as being on a spectrum, rather than being distinct from each other. So if you're in the pulses industry, there are opportunities to get involved across that spectrum. The reason being that a lot of these foods, when you grow them, they require feed in the same way that animals require feed. So cultivated meat requires amino acids to grow in the same way that cells inside my body require amino acids to grow. And many of these products are already being brought to market in combination with each other. So from a spectrum from plants to biotech, this is one product, the Impossible Burger, that has different ingredients in it that fit across that spectrum. So that was my quick overview of what's happening in food technology right now in the alternative protein industry. There are tons of products that are coming to the fore, underpinned by a suite of technologies that's enabling us to explore things that we never thought possible. One hero category, which is plant-based meats, is already in the market, growing very rapidly and presents an opportunity here and now and over the next decades, whereas another, cultivated meat, is interesting for a long time beyond that as well. Thank you. So at this point, I'm going to call my panelists up on stage. So first up, we have Mr. Chirag Sabunani. Chirag is the co-founder of Supplant Foods. He's keenly interested in entering this sector, and as a food formulator with deep connections with Western companies, he started Supplant Foods to fill the gap in quality ingredients for these formulations, and then eventually build out this industry in India. So Chirag comes with a background in material science from Northwestern University and management from the Kellogg School of Management. Next, we have Ms. Aashish Kasad. Aashish, I think many of you already know her. She's a chartered accountant by training and is the very respected Ernst & Young India National Tax Leader for the chemical sector. She's also the Diversity and Inclusion Leader for the India region. So Aashish has over 24 years of work experience, and she's built a strong personal brand and reputation. She advises large global corporates on international tax and domestic tax issues. We're really happy to have a keen insight on the broad business opportunity in this sector. And then finally, we have a colleague of mine, Mr. Siddharth Bhide. Siddharth holds a master's degree in food science from Rutgers and a bachelor's in food technology from Osmania University in Hyderabad. Before he joined the Good Food Institute India, Siddharth was working for nearly 5 years at Just, the company that makes the Just egg. So he's going to give us a scientific perspective on what's happening in this sector and the challenge of creating these products. All right, thank you all so much for joining me up on stage here. Firstly, I'm going to start very simply. Could you tell us all a little bit about your background, aside from what I just said, and your interest in this sector?
All right, I'll go first. Well, guys, it's a real pleasure to be here. My background is that of a food formulator, and that's sort of what we put together in our firm to really understand the needs of other food formulators around the world and food companies and develop ingredients around that. We obviously work with a wide spectrum of plant-based ingredients, pulses among them, but also hydrocolloids and other categories, and see how to really provide solutions. Food formulators and food trends keep changing, requirements keep changing around the world, and that's where we try and play. So we've entered with our first product right now, which is a value-added chickpea flour, and we're getting some good traction from the US.
Hello, everyone. It's a delightful experience to be part of this August panel. My background, as you've heard earlier, is more related to the tax and regulatory framework that the government offers to food companies, to chemical and agrochemical and agricultural produce companies. And there is a lot to offer which many of us aren't so familiar with when we're looking at innovation, whether it is a startup environment, whether it's a patent box regime and so on, which can really enable a company to feel that additional boost to the investment they are making towards innovation. So I'll leave it at that and talk more about it during the panel discussion.
Hi everyone, it's a real pleasure to be here. Again, as Varun mentioned, my background is in traditional food science, and I worked with Just before joining the Good Food Institute, where we made mung bean based eggs. And again, my interest in the sector is how do we use modern technology and food science to make our food system better, to answer questions around food security and nutrition security. So I'm glad to be on this panel to discuss the same.
Great. So my first question is for Aashish specifically. So you're a go-to advisor for large corporations on matters that are huge, right? Related to international trade, taxation, regulation, etc. What do we know about specifically Indian corporations and their appetite for innovation and what their incentives are and how it's driven by these sorts of new areas?
So I think more and more, as we heard the prior two sessions as well, innovation is the name of the game. Whatever brought you success till now is not going to get you success in future. You may have products which were exceedingly doing well with your consumers in the past, but the world's moving at a very fast pace, and most companies are realizing that they need to keep innovating to stay ahead, to be competitively in an advantageous position. And to that extent, there is much more spend on R&D now than ever before to bring the right kind of products in the marketplace ahead of competition. Now, it's not that easy for large-scale corporates to really get a lot of innovation on the table instantaneously because of the laborious processes that they have in-house. And therefore, we are seeing more and more large corporates tying up with startups, with innovative companies, or even acquiring them so that they can get, at a very fast pace, innovative products into their pipeline to be ahead of their competition. And that's where you're seeing more and more companies earlier started in Silicon Valley in various parts of the world, but Europe's picked up in a big way where large companies have set up special funds just to invest in innovative companies, who fail fast and come up with successful outcomes, because they just have that kind of ecosystem and environment which enables them to be able to come up with new ideas, new developments, which can then be tested further to bring them to scale and get new products into the market at a faster pace. So if you're asking me, is there an appetite? Absolutely. More and more you're seeing companies looking at healthy outcomes. Look at Pepsi. Initially, they were all into carbonated drinks. Today, they are coming up with milk products and others because they realize the world is moving towards a healthy food habit. And to that extent, now more and more millennials also are looking at companies which are value-based, which have a different kind of mindset towards which they drive their purpose of existence. So you will see companies looking at innovating, bringing in more healthy outcomes into their product portfolio and baskets, actually projecting that more effectively. So let's look at even companies like Nestle. Yeah? They provide packaged milk. Now they have the other alternative of saying fortified milk, fortified with vitamin A, vitamin D, and so on, which helps customers to look at it and say, okay, here's a healthy outcome, I'd prefer going for that. You're going to see more and more companies with biscuits and various other snacks, wherever they will bring out this additional aspect of saying, this is a healthy outcome. You see customers who are more discerning now going for those products. So indeed, it's a large opportunity just waiting to explode.
So health is one of the key drivers there, is what you're saying?
Health is certainly going to be a key concern. While we did see in yesterday's session 18% increase in fast foods, but I think more and more as people are realizing lifestyle ailments are impacting them, you're going to see people moving towards healthier options, which have a good taste. I mean, you can't have Treptin every day all your life, but certainly you can have products which are healthy and yet having a good taste flavor to them.
Got it. So Chirag, you mentioned that you're currently working on getting products to market and you're seeing the US as a huge opportunity for you, right? So because you've been in this sector now for some time, evaluating the opportunity, formulating products, and having expertise in-house to do so, could you talk a little bit about how you see the Indian market developing over the next years vis-a-vis the international markets?
Sure. So naturally, when we look at the spectrum of markets around the world, as we've discussed earlier today as well, the US market tends to lead a lot of trends, right? So when we work with our formulation partners and we look at trends, not only is there data, but there's also the drive from consumers to try different things. So most of the innovation as we see it starts over there. Those areas become the trend-setting markets. They also articulate their requirements very clearly. And so when we develop things over here, we see India as a great market in the future, but also a supply base right now which can support what's happening in the Western markets. Eventually, of course, India has the numbers. And as the US has the propensity to pay more for product over time, India will be the market that demands more. And we need, as a group over here, we want to see those large volumes as well. So we will see the market in India develop, but the trends end up getting set over there and then end up coming over here. That's our basic hypothesis.
Got it. So Siddharth, before you joined us, as I said, you were at a company called Just, which is rapidly scaling right now, but you were there from the very early days. So when you were looking at the challenge of formulating eggs from plants, or more generally of formulating these sorts of analogs to animal-sourced foods, but made very differently, what does that process look like? How do you install that innovation in a company? What does the DNA of a company like that look like?
Yeah, so just like any other companies in the space too, like Beyond or the Impossible Foods, it's a tech-forward company. It's a R&D intensive company. So we had like people from different facets of R&D in the company. So we had like biochemists who are looking at different, protein fractions and at a more fundamental level. And then we had people, from the experience in like milling background and upstream processing background, or how do you best create, protein isolates. We had people from food science team like me, like, who looked at formulation and processing techniques. Then we had people on more like manufacturing side, like how best do you manufacture these products in a cost-effective way. So a lot of facets of R&D were involved. And then again, so Just was focused on replacing the egg. And as we all know, that egg is a very versatile product. It emulsifies, it foams, it builds structure, it gels on the pan. So we were trying to evaluate different plants and then put them through a screening process and understand their functionalities. And then we found mung bean, which gelled really well, and that's how the Just egg was born. And another thing was also like a lot of these R&D processes were more of a handshake agreement rather than handover, which again helped in faster product development.
Okay, so given that that was the environment in your company in the United States, I want to put a question to both Chirag and Siddharth actually. What do you see as the challenges across the spectrum of scientific talent, infrastructure, et cetera, in the Indian ecosystem to building your companies? And Chirag, you're actively doing that, right? So what are the challenges that you're experiencing right now?
Thanks, Varun. That's a great question, and it's something we're grappling with all the time. I think I'll start with first looking at the talent question. As Siddharth alluded to, we need people with strong biotech backgrounds, with food science backgrounds in order to do the primary research. And while a lot of people are being trained in these areas in the country, the transition from textbook knowledge to practical knowledge is something we've all faced with people that we've worked with, right? So in Western markets, people tend to get a little bit more of that exposure, and I think our education system needs to facilitate that a little bit more. And it's a natural process, it'll happen. People learn quickly, and that I believe is one thing which will transition over time. The second aspect, of course, is developing the markets over here, right? A lot of Indian producers are very focused on the domestic market, and because of various different logistical challenges, very often these things tend to be fragmented around the country. We need to take a little bit more of a systemic approach to look at the global opportunity over here, and whether it means that organizations like GFI play the key role or the government plays a key role, we need to have a little bit more of an organized approach to see that India capitalizes on this transition that's happening in the food system, as it really is something that, for everyone in this room, can drive a lot of development and change.
Yeah, and actually, before Siddharth goes into his answer as well, I think that from a Pulse's standpoint, has a lot of resonance, at least with me, because some of the things, and perhaps Siddharth, you can touch on this, some of the things we face in stimulating the entrepreneurial ecosystem here is that, especially with Indian ingredients, Indian crops, there isn't a lot of data available for how entrepreneurs can actually formulate products with them.
Definitely, as Varun mentioned, a couple other points to add to Chirag is lack of data. So, like something like wheat or soy, this has been optimized over decades, to create certain products. But if you want to create novel products out of, novel crops, not really novel in terms of, their traditional uses, but in terms of their application towards like a plant-based meat or plant-based egg, a lot of research needs to go into it for entrepreneurs to use them. And secondly, also access to infrastructure. So if you look at any of these products, they have been made using a lot of like equipment, right from like upstream processing of these crops to then protein isolation to then using extrusion, which is a primary technology in making plant-based meat. And in the West, there are a lot of extruders available in different universities and scientific talent who could actually guide entrepreneurs and corporations on how to use these equipment and a faster R&D process, which is something which is still developing in India. So it's a combination of all of this which can, again, make R&D process really rapid, even in India.
So Aashish, on that note, actually, one of the things that sort of slows down the innovation ecosystem in India is that these ingredients aren't available locally. So in order to make them available, an entrepreneur would have to import them from abroad, which means that there's tremendous import duties attached to them, which means that the price of your end product is probably untenable for the Indian market, right? So how do you see this playing out over the medium to long term? Because I think regulation, which you're going to cover in your next session, which is right after this, regulation, import, export, tax, etc., are huge problems that are over the heads of entrepreneurs in this sector. So how do they navigate this system?
So we do have some free trade agreements with different countries which help reduce the rates. But I think more and more, it's about putting across to the government for certain key ingredients that you believe are relevant for innovation to represent to them and let them know why those products are important for the betterment of the country in serving, in getting, much more healthy products into the market. And I think sometimes the government just needs to be made aware about that. And once that would happen, I'm sure they would relook at some of those import duty rates, as they have done even for certain other products. I think it's just about creating the right awareness, which is currently missing in the picture.
So when you say other products that may have been novel products in and of themselves, or not necessarily so perhaps, could you speak a little bit perhaps to how one would make that case? What do you see as the opportunity for something like this? What do you see as the potential size of this for the Indian business sector?
It's difficult to quantify that, but I think, as I was mentioning earlier too, people are always interested in healthy products. And, the more there is information made available either through social media and through other channels about the importance of health linked to this. We saw the session even yesterday about how the whole egg campaign drove the country in a certain positive direction, towards egg consumption. The same way, there needs to perhaps be some campaigns around, high protein diets, what's the importance and relevance of that, how you can get these alternate proteins through different products. I mean, today the younger generation is not necessarily interested in just going for the first job that they get after coming out of an IIT or IIM. You're seeing a lot of young talent actually getting into their own startups, and innovating. A lot of them are today in the agricultural space itself, looking at helping farmers. If their minds are just channelized into thinking about these kind of new products, I think, we have the largest talent pool right now available in the world, youth, which can be actually really working extensively in this space to drive change and innovation. It's just about creating that kind of knowledge base, information, insights, which will drive their thinking in that direction. I think, think about the way you have now whole grain atta and multi-grain attas and things like that coming up. whole grain wheat breads and things like that. So, and you find takers for that. That means the consumers are getting aware about, different kind of products, brown breads, things like that are no more products which weren't being picked up. It's, the growth of that is increasing manifold. So the opportunity space is huge. It's about now creating that, about getting the talent in to innovate, and for that even the government's created a great environment through the Startup India mission. So as you see, even in the latest budget, they've extended the time window for, making your tax exemptions and things like that. So they are creating the environment for people to get into a startup culture, to innovate, to fail fast, and to keep trying again and again, experimenting. It's for us now as an industry body to create that awareness through different campaigns, through Good Food India institutes and so on and so forth, for people to start thinking differently.
So putting a pin in that for a second, I want to talk about, as you said, the youth as consumers, right? They're driving a lot of change throughout the world. If you look at any data that's emerging from anywhere in different countries, you see that millennials are even more strongly moving in the direction of sustainability in terms of their consumption and their desired consumption. But is that true in India? So for example, would it come at the expense of cost? Would it come at the expense of taste? Even health, it's usually what we see in the data is health, but never at the expense of taste, right? So, Chirag, I want to put a question to you about how you're thinking about consumers with respect to as you grow. Maybe you can get your first 1,000 customers if you were making an end product for the consumer market. Maybe you can get your first 1,000 customers from the sustainability crowd. But how do you expand beyond that to a huge pocket of consumption?
Sure, and great question, because we design ingredients around this all the time, right? So I would say in the more traditional, slightly older generation India, it's always about taste first, then cost, and nutrition is a distant third. And that's just the way the market is segmented. Obviously, with what we are trying to do with value-added ingredients, plant ingredients that are healthy, we want to try and see that taste and nutrition are very closely aligned. And obviously, India being a cost-sensitive market, we have to ensure that when things do come to India, the costs are at a price point that consumers are willing to pay. With the younger generation, yes, there is a higher propensity, from what we are seeing, there's a higher propensity to pay a higher price, but it's still shrouded by the fact that their parents are all telling them, what are you doing, right? So we have to work with this transition as it's happening, and it is coming along. But for now, India primarily is still that market where it's about taste, price, and then nutrition, and it's changing.
So, by the way, how much time do I have left? Because we were a little bit different on the time. Okay, gotcha. So we have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to put one final question to the panel and then maybe open it up to Q&A from the crowd. For both myself and for the panelists. My question is it's about contextualizing everything to the pulse producers and traders and farmers associations that deal with pulses, right? So what are some pieces of advice you'd give people for how they can work with you, perhaps Chirag, or with you, Siddharth? Or Aashish, what pieces of advice would you give people right now to explore over the next months and years to get involved in this sector?
Sure, I can take that first. So for everyone in the room, we all know this, it's been said before today itself, that pulses are fantastic, right? They have so many different elements to them, from the proteins, the pectins, the fibers, the starches. And so for everyone in this room, I think it's about looking at your spectrum of what you have available and seeing how to apply it. Combinations of pulses with different plant ingredients to get the right protein profile. So it is quite an R&D task. That's one of the things that we specialize in. So without this being an absolute plug, I would say, that's the sort of thing that we do, and we'd be happy to chat with people in the room. Obviously, the next stage is then to scale the whole idea. But for everyone over here, look, and it's about seeing where to value add within that spectrum which you already have access to.
Yeah, so at the Good Food Institute, we work with different stakeholders to build the ecosystem of plant-based meat, egg, and dairy products. And again, pulses play a very big role in this ecosystem. So we would be happy to chat with anyone and answer any queries that you might have, like what kind of information do you need to get your work started in this area, and how can we help you? So we can connect you to different stakeholders, get you the answers that you need through our connections. And yeah, so and also in addition to this, we are also working on a project, what we call our Indigenous Crops Initiative, where we are collecting a lot of scientific information on millets to start off with. But then we could also discuss like how this information could be applicable to even pulses, and how we could generate this information for pulses to make these to make pulses more applicable to plant-based and cultivated meat, egg, dairy products. So please do feel free to reach out to any one of us here.
I would just have a simple thing to say: imagine, innovate, and inspire. And the reason I say this, there's no dearth to the imagination of all of us sitting in this room, right from a simple batata vada that we ate at the reception. You know, if the batter of that could be fortified with some of the pulse, protein, to anything that we eat every single day in our thali, we can keep bringing more fortified proteins into our daily food, which will help us to become a healthier India. And I think once that happens and you keep innovating and developing new products, the next thing is, the right go-to-market strategy. Whether you tie up with dietitians, create that information about the product so that they start recommending that to the customers, or to, through various channels, and creating the right kind of knowledge about the product and its importance in your health quotient. And inspire, because it's always a me too, right? We've seen that with Patanjali and several other new companies which come into the market with herbal products and so on. It just takes a leader to come up with a new variant of a product for others to follow suit. So yeah, that's where I leave it. Imagine, innovate, and inspire.
All right, thank you so much, all three of you. Really appreciate that. I'll open it up to a few questions from the audience. I think we have about 10-ish minutes left.
Sure. Mic is coming around, so I'll get the mic to you. And
good morning. I'm Jeff Rubney with the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council. So I have a little experience with consumers in the United States. So in the meat alt sector, especially with Beyond Burgers, that actually doesn't play out very well with vegetarians and vegans in the United States, because they find the product to be too meat-like. So it's disagreeable to them. And in the United States, it doesn't really matter, because that's only 4% of the population. The market for Beyond Meat is the flexitarians, which represents about 60% of the market in the US. So the distribution is completely different in India, where 50 to 60 to 70% of the population are vegan and vegetarian. So how does the meat alt versus, more specifically, beef alt versus chicken alt, how do you see that opportunity being different in India than it is in North America?
I'll take it a little bit and then I'll open it up as well to both of you. So it's a great question. As I said, Americans are eating 3 burgers a week. Those are all beef burgers, right? And America's a very high meat consuming country. They eat about 120 kilograms of meat per capita. That number's about 6 for India, right? What we're seeing in the market is a rapid rise in meat consumption over the next decade that's driven by rising incomes. So the primary constraint here isn't necessarily religion, as people have thought for a very long time, but basically income. And people are also getting uprooted from traditional religious values. They're moving into cities. Of course, a large proportion of our population remains rural, but there's a huge proportion that lives in cities that's increasingly urban, increasingly westernized, increasingly upwardly mobile, right? So that's the segment that makes sense for plant-based meat substitutes that are analogs to meat. Within that, we're talking about products like chicken tikka. We're talking about products like keema, which is mince. We're talking about products like biryani. So biryani is a meat rice dish that's made a very specific way that is by far the best performing product on all the online delivery platforms. So if you look at any of them, Swiggy, Zomato, etc., it's a complete hero category in India. So those are the things to look at, and they present different challenges than making a burger in the West, right? So if you're making a biryani the meat, the plant-based meat that you give a chef or that you give a food service chain that has many outlets has to perform well in the way that they want to cook biryani. So these are all the challenges that matter. We've been compiling a lot of consumer insights, and we're going to do this over the next 6 to 9 months as well. And we'd love to partner with anyone in the crowd that's looking at doing those things and seeing where the opportunities lie. Really quickly, before I pass this on as well, the veg protein opportunity in India is also a big one. So I had a slide up that said between 2013 and 2017, the number of products that were launching with a high protein claim in the Indian market, packaged foods, doubled, right? Now, not all of those claims are legitimate claims because we don't have really robust regulation for what you can label high protein. It's coming into play, it's being enforced more and more, but that presents an opportunity to pulse producers, right? So even basic products like biscuits, flours, there's a lot of work ongoing in that area, and I think it represents a huge opportunity.
I would just add to say that while there's a popular belief that the largest part of India is vegetarian, actually it's only 45% of India which is vegetarian. 55% is non-vegetarian. The other aspect to note is the world's moving towards growing to over 100 years of age. In India, we are far short of that. You know, the lifespan is still only around 78 on an average at best. And that's because of, people not really having had a healthy diet, healthy food, and it results in them falling sick at an earlier stage and not having the best of medical aid. So if there's much more of a thrust towards healthy eating, towards fortified foods with alternate proteins, it will help the Indians to have a longer life, a more healthier life. And I think the government would certainly take active steps towards that if this is projected well. So it's now going to have to be about a lot of the ecosystem gathering together, brainstorming of how do we take this now to the next level. And as soon as you start creating more awareness, I can definitely think that there's going to be a thrust of new companies coming in with innovative products. And, once there's more innovation on the table, you have large corporates with, a huge wallet waiting to acquire such entities, to bring those products into their pipeline and take it forward into the marketplace.
Another quick point to add is in terms of actual product development of these products, India could have a slight advantage in terms of flavor, because a lot of times, and as Varun was mentioning, they are consumed in the form of biryani or a chicken tikka, and all of these are flavored products, like flavored with Indian spices. So in the West, like if you're making like a Beyond Burger Just Egg, which is pretty much eaten with salt and pepper or some minor flavorings, in India a lot more spices are used. So even if the flavor is still a little beany, in some areas it is still fine, at least to begin with. And then, it can always be improvised over time. So that's going to be an advantage in India to start off.
Just one more point to add there. It's a great question around product market fit. And there's a big difference if we were to look at the traditional meat sector. Rearing cattle, handling poultry, that's all very different, all very, very different aspects of the entire meat value chain. But when it comes to formulating plant-based meat substitutes, it's not a huge change. It's a mild to moderate change going from something that replicates the chicken texture to then replicating beef. And that allows, again, formulators to have a lot of flexibility once they nail down one aspect to then modify it towards other things. So we're still in that phase where we're getting it, I would say we're still in the phase where we're getting it down to the perfect replacement for any one meat, and then we will easily be able to go towards the other ones and get product market fit better.
Yeah, it occurs to me that Jeff mentioned the term flexitarians, which may not be familiar to everyone in the crowd. If you've heard the term flexitarian or you know it, would you please raise your hands? Okay, yeah, so basically everyone that's not from India. So a flexitarian is someone that eats meat, that is a non-vegetarian person, but is reducing their consumption of meat. So it's not a vegan, it's a huge proportion of the general population, especially in countries outside India, who is people who are reading about sustainability, people who are reading about health implications about animal-sourced foods, and they want to reduce their consumption. So what this sector is doing for them is it's giving them the option to do so. So when Impossible Foods launches the Impossible Burger at Burger King, as Jeff said, that's a very meaty product. It's not for vegans, it's not for vegetarians, because the company wants to help people replace meat consumption. So 70, 80, 90% of their consumers are meat eaters who are flexitarian.
Hi, yeah. Good morning. I think I've got in front of you, mate.
Just one quick. It's not a question, it's an invitation. If anybody wants to try, I have it right here. You can try. It's tasteless, but we will add some Indian spices into it, some masala, tikka, whatever. You name it, we will do it for you. Here, please feel free to ask
All
me.
right, yeah. Thank you, my friend. Does anyone have
I've got a
another
question.
Yeah.
At the back, can anyone hear me?
We have one right here and one at the back as well.
Yeah,
But
good morning. Todd Lees from Latima Brokerage, Australia. Just wondering, can you give us an insight into the economics of converting yellow pea protein into a beef patty, and also perhaps converting mung bean into egg products, or products that look like eggs? And then secondary, can you give us some insight into the chemicals that are used in these processes to convert the plant-based to a beef-type looking product?
yeah, that's a great question. I'll just answer quickly on the egg. So the global cost of producing an egg is something like 8 cents. In India, it's cheaper because India has one of the cheapest production economies in the world, so about 4 or 5 cents, depending on how you count it. Half of that cost is in the feed of the animal, right? So that you're taking away a lot of that just by bringing in the cost of producing from mung beans. Currently, these products are a little more expensive. So I don't know what Just's internal cost basis is, but I believe it's somewhere at a multiple of that, right? But over time, as you scale up, you're able to bring it down. I don't have access to like internal yield projections from Just, but that's basically what I know is they're currently at a multiple of that cost of producing an egg. And to be clear, the egg is the most commoditized animal meat, right? Something like 1.4 trillion eggs are eaten all over the world every year. So that's a particular challenge, is bringing down to the cost of an egg. As far as making, isolating protein from chickpeas, I think I'd want to defer to the person up here who's doing that.
Sure. So I wouldn't necessarily want to go into those economics, but broadly speaking, I can point out to some of the issues which are going to cause or drive costs. And for us, it's primarily water handling. You have to put up an ATP. It's an expensive piece of equipment to run. That being said, again, to Varun's point, the moment we start looking at plant-based alternatives, we have the ability to bring costs down as we scale. In the initial phases, it's always going to be more expensive. You may even price yourself out of the market, but as you start getting some scale over there, you can start driving costs down. To your question about chemicals that are going into the product, right now, for instance, methyl cellulose is something that's being used in almost every meat analog product because of the properties it has, and the whole world is looking for a solution over there. We've done some work around it, and we've just started sending samples out to some of our formulation partners. So we're moving towards a world where we have natural, an all-natural product. It's a question of formulators understanding what they need, translating that into something that product developers can then, or ingredient developers can then get to. So that's where it goes back to that whole point of we are moving towards that perfect ingredient.
Okay, thank you for your answers. So it's a heavily subsidised project at the moment. Is that correct? If so, who's bearing the cost at the moment of that subsidisation?
Yeah, so if you're small and you're scaling up, you just have to. It's your investors, it's your whole team, and if you get any government incentives, you have to bear that cost as you get to that point where you start scaling and you become relevant. I mean, you're competing with the big boys of the world, right? The ADMs, the Roquettes of the world, so on and so forth.
I mean, subsidy is an interesting term to use for it, right? It's investment. You would initially, it depends on what your business strategy is, I guess, but in most cases, people are passing on the cost to the consumer initially, but as they scale, they're able to drive that cost down very rapidly because it is scalable. So, for example, one of the most exciting developments in the sector last year, when the plant-based meat sector went into overdrive, was Impossible Foods needed to supply to 7,200 North American locations of Burger King. Right? And they had this one plant in Oakland, California, which was running 3 shifts and absolutely could not take any more capacity. So they signed a deal with OSI, which makes burgers already, processes them at huge scale, processes beef burgers, chicken, everything. They made a deal with OSI to scale it up, and they're able to bring it down to a price point where they can offer it to Burger King at a cost basis that makes sense, and they don't have to pass on more cost to the consumer. The drive to do that was very rapid. So they started off as a Michelin-starred product, and they went into Burger King basically in the space of 3 years. So I wouldn't really look at it as something that is a subsidy. It's definitely upfront investment in R&D, upfront investment in scaling. But then beyond that, you can bring the cost basis down very rapidly. Okay, we're out of time, so thank you so much for your questions. I'm sorry, I know we couldn't take all of them, but we'd love to talk to you after the session. Thank you so much.